Why would people who live leisurely in the countryside come over? This is Jim's house, not a hotel. When my mother-in-law sided with my husband, he became more assertive and began making unreasonable statements. Please don't bring in people who seem to be struggling money-wise because they don't have a job. If you have a complaint, you should just get out of here, my husband sneered. However, although my father was unemployed, he was not economically destitute, and his inappropriate remarks sparked more pity than anger in me. Seeing my husband trying to impress his mother, I felt a surge of contempt. Fine, I will leave, but you handle what comes after on your own, I replied. My husband and mother-in-law, unaware of the hardships to come, joyfully saw me off. I am Anna. I am 33 years old and run a real estate company. Although I'm the president, I am still inexperienced, having taken over the business from my father only 2 years ago. The real estate company, established by my father, is successful and owns many properties. My father, still in his early 60s and expected to continue as president, suddenly announced his retirement. I regret prioritizing work over family for too long. From now on, I intend to put my family first, he said. He decided to move to his wife's hometown, where she had returned several years earlier to help care for her grandmother with dementia, because it was too difficult to manage alone. I've barely helped with household chores, so I want to make up for my past mistakes, he said, slightly embarrassed. My mother was very pleased to hear this. Previously, my father prioritized work, and my mother managed all the household chores and taking care of me all by herself, without complaints, creating an environment that allowed him to focus on his work. Although I agreed with my father's decision, I couldn't hide my turmoil about taking over as president. I'm too young for the role of president. Please leave it to someone else, I pleaded, but my father's resolve did not change. The other employees trust you, and it might be good to take on the challenge. If there's a problem, I'll help, my father assured me, and I decided to accept the responsibility. 6 months before taking over as president, I married Jim, whom I met through work. My father highly respected Jim, saying, "I fully support your marriage to Jim because he is capable and sincere." However, my mother was somewhat concerned when she learned about Jim's family background. Jim also lives alone with his mother, doesn't he? Anna, you might end up living with Jim's mother, my mother remarked. As it turned out, my husband was living with his mother. His parents had separated during his high school years, and his mother raised him alone. My husband deeply respected his mother, and I was also preparing to live with her in the future. However, it seems his mother preferred to live alone. My mother seems to have a new partner and wants to enjoy more freedom, my husband said, and I felt relieved. It was a relief for both, being only children and worried about caring for their parents, to learn that his mother did not want to live with them. After our marriage, we lived in my apartment. But after my father moved to my mother's hometown, we started living in the apartment where my parents had lived. We should move to the apartment where my parents used to live. It's on the top floor of a luxury apartment and much bigger than here, my husband said, so we decided to move there. This apartment was owned by my company, making the paperwork process smooth. It might be too big for just the two of us, but it felt right for when we had children. After moving to the top floor of the luxury apartment, my husband was very satisfied. "I'm happy I married you. Thanks to that, we live in a wonderful apartment." It seems he thought that I had bought the apartment from my father. How much did you buy this room for? It would be nice if your father gave it to us for free, right? Why he was under that impression was unclear, but I decided to keep the truth a secret. By letting him believe we had bought the expensive apartment, I hoped he would contribute to the living expenses. Previously, my father had said my husband was responsible, but ever since we got married, he had hardly paid any living expenses. If my husband thinks that I've depleted our funds purchasing the apartment, he might start worrying about our finances a bit. He has been assuming that I will cover all expenses even after I became president, and I felt it was unfair that he contributed nothing to our costs. Shortly after we began our life in the new apartment, my father called. "The view from the apartment must be stunning, right? Does Jim like it?" he asked, sparking my interest. I thought I needed to surprise him a bit when I heard that Jim isn't contributing to the household. My father continued. While smiling, he revealed that he had told a false story to my husband during the move. The apartment was quite expensive, and I pretended that I had bought it from my father at the regular price, which depleted my savings. Understanding this background deepened my understanding of where my husband's misunderstanding came from. My husband, under the impression that I had purchased the apartment, was expected to support the household financially, but that did not happen. In reality, far from supporting our household, he considered the apartment his own property. There aren't many people my age who own such a prestigious apartment. My mother was very pleased when I told her, he said. It's unclear how he explains it to others, but he seems to be proclaiming that we own the apartment we live in. Seeing how happy he is makes it difficult to reveal that we are actually renting and paying high rent. As long as I keep silent, the truth remains unknown, and I've decided to keep it that way. After we moved into the luxury apartment, my mother-in-law started visiting more often. Jim always said it, but this view is truly wonderful. I am envious of you two living here. She always praised the view. Feeling that she might like this place, Jim responded with a smile. There's still room here, Mom. Why don't you consider moving in? Your old house is getting too old and uncomfortable, isn't it? He suggested. Seeing my surprised face, my mother-in-law seemed to realize something. If I come here, Anna might not be pleased, so I'll refrain, she said regretfully. I was shocked that my husband had suddenly changed his opinion about living together, which hadn't been discussed before. Feeling that my mother-in-law was trying to avoid cohabitation for my sake, I explained my feelings. I think it's better to maintain a proper distance with you, Mother. From my experience with my family, I believe it's important to respect each other even in close relationships. I'd like to discuss the cohabitation issue thoroughly with my husband. My mother-in-law looked a bit displeased but did not argue further. After she left, I asked my husband about the situation. Wasn't your mother planning to live with her new partner? I asked, to which my husband frowned and retorted, Don't interfere with what my mother decides. This is my house. There's no problem if my mother lives with us. It seems he thought this house was his own. The apartment we live in is a rental, so it belongs neither to me nor to my husband. Since I registered my husband as the leaseholder when we signed the contract, he might be under the impression that he purchased the property. I explained the details of the contract to him, but he did not check them thoroughly and misunderstood that he had bought the property. Thinking that telling him this apartment isn't his would make him angrier, I avoided that discussion. Moreover, the possibility of my mother-in-law moving in troubled me. "I don't mind if your mother moves in, but her new partner isn't coming with her, right?" I asked cautiously, and my husband was also at a loss for words. While I can accept living with my mother-in-law, I want to avoid welcoming her unknown romantic partner. Since my husband had previously mentioned the possibility of his mother remarrying, that issue has been on my mind. Even when I asked him, he avoided giving a clear answer. Lately, he has been coming home late every day, and our conversations have decreased compared to before. I've been upset for a while that he doesn't pay living expenses, but learning that he is unilaterally planning to have his mother move in was both surprising and disappointing. Distressed by my husband's issues, I contacted my parents' home for advice. "I'm worried Jim might invite his mother to our apartment, but how should I handle it?" I asked, and after a moment of silence, my father responded. "I thought you might end up living together eventually, but this seems early. But will she really move in?" My father also sensed the possibility of my mother-in-law living with us, but could not hide his concern. When I mentioned that her lover might also live with us, my father answered more forcefully, "That would be a serious issue. If something comes up, I'll join the discussion. Please contact me." These words encouraged me. I also wanted to talk to my mother about the situation, but I heard that my grandmother had fallen ill and been taken to the hospital. According to my father, her condition was very critical, so he told me he would inform me immediately if anything happened. I was worried about my mother-in-law, but I was more concerned about my grandmother's health, and soon received news that her condition had worsened. When I rushed to the hospital, it seemed as if my grandmother had been waiting for me, and she passed away shortly after. I tried to contact Jim several times to inform him, but he did not respond, and it was only after some time that he replied. "How long will you be staying at your parents' house?" he asked. Irritated by his cheerful tone, I replied that I would stay for about a week, and he immediately ended the call. My parents were displeased because he did not appear at my grandmother's funeral. I wanted to talk to Jim. "Since your grandmother passed away, he could have at least taken a day off. Why didn't he come?" my father said, and my mother nodded in disappointment. "Jim is not trustworthy. He didn't even show up at the funeral, and he doesn't pay the living expenses," my mother added. Jim lost my parents' trust, and neither did he come over to my parents' place after the funeral. When I returned home, Jim's mother had already moved in. "I've moved all the belongings. I guess I have to live here now," she said cheerfully. I was shocked by her words, and Jim looked at me mockingly. "Your grandmother passed away at a convenient time, so I could move in while you were away." This comment made my anger reach its peak. Interpreting my grandmother's death as convenient and the abrupt start of living together infuriated me beyond measure. The belongings had already been moved in, and I had lost the option to evict her. With the sudden start of cohabitation, my mother-in-law did not help with household chores at all. "Hurry up and make dinner. You need to sort out the belongings too." She treated me like a housemaid, a stark contrast to her calm demeanor during visits, and was strict in her orders. It was impossible for me, who was working, to meet all her demands, and her displeasure increased each time. "Anna, you are a wife and should obey. Jim is earning well, so you won't have trouble even if you quit your job." Despite receiving her complaints, I grew suspicious of how Jim was explaining our financial situation to her. Her complaints were unbearable, but what I couldn't tolerate was her inviting her boyfriend over to our house while Jim and I were at work. When I returned home from work, a man I didn't recognize was in the house and demanded that I start cooking immediately. I was shocked to learn that the man, close in age to Jim, was my mother-in-law's boyfriend. "Please stop your mom from inviting her boyfriend over. Are you okay with strangers entering our home as they please?" I asked, but Jim seemed unconcerned. I was also worried that her boyfriend was close in age to Jim. "Is that man really serious about your mother? Isn't she being deceived?" I asked seriously, and Jim, sensing something, became silently worried. The man was flashy, wearing expensive accessories and a watch, not seeming like a typical office worker. Jim, like me, doubted that the man was seriously employed. Just as I was about to discuss this matter with my parents, my mother contacted me. She wanted to stay over for a few days to thank relatives who had helped at my grandmother's funeral, she told me. She said there was something she needed to tell Jim. "Actually, my mother-in-law has already moved in. Let's talk about it while everyone is here." My mother was shocked to hear this. My parents wanted a serious conversation with Jim and his mother, so when I conveyed this, Jim was furious. "Why are your parents coming over? This is my house now." Hearing his voice, his mother rushed over and demanded an explanation from me. "Why would people who live leisurely in the countryside come over? This is Jim's house, not a hotel." When my mother-in-law sided with Jim, he became more assertive and began making unreasonable statements. "Please don't bring in people who seem to be struggling money-wise because they don't have a job. If you have a complaint, you should just get out of here," my husband sneered. However, although my father was unemployed, he was not economically destitute, and his inappropriate remarks sparked more pity than anger in me. Seeing my husband trying to impress his mother, I felt a surge of contempt. "Fine, I will leave, but you handle what comes after on your own," I replied. When I said that calmly, Jim was at a loss for words, but his mother vehemently objected. "Impudent daughter-in-law, get out. We can manage without you." Confused by her excessive confidence, I took my valuables and left the apartment. Since Jim had not told his mother I was a president, he thought they wouldn't struggle without me. I chose an empty property owned by my company and decided to move there. When I invited my parents to my new home and explained the situation, my mother was furious. "Why did you have to move out of your own apartment? Let's restore everything to how it was." In fact, my mother was under the misconception that the apartment was mine, but my father laughed and revealed that it was rented. My mother had been away caring for my grandmother for a long time and was not aware of the contract details. "We need to tell Jim the reality soon. He can't afford the high rent," my father said, and I agreed, deciding to check the situation myself. When I returned to the apartment after a long time, Jim was there, looking dejected and waiting for me. "I was actually about to contact you. I got a notice about the rent. It's okay to say that I own this place, right?" To clear up the misunderstanding, I showed Jim the rental contract. "This is the contract you signed yourself. How can you say such absurd things?" I exclaimed. Seeing the document, Jim realized he had signed it and his face changed. As Jim fell silent, his mother screamed with a terrifying expression. "Whether this apartment is rented or not, I am not leaving here. I have already given up my previous residence, and I have nowhere else to go." As my mother-in-law grew angry, I calmly responded that paying the rent was the solution, but she raised her voice even more. "I understand that. But why do I need to pay all the rent at once? The bill says $7,000, she argued, so I calmly countered. "That $7,000 is just for 1 month. It's impossible to get a contract for a property of this level for $7,000 a year." At this response, Jim and his mother were at a loss for words. To the particularly upset mother-in-law, I added one more biting remark. "If you feel the rent is high, why not ask the person you're dating to pay it? He seemed affluent enough, so $7,000 shouldn't be a problem." At this, my mother-in-law glared at me fiercely, then silently left the room. After she left, Jim sadly revealed the truth. Actually, my mother was deceived by that man. He even ran away with the money she got from selling her house. It turns out that my mother-in-law sold her house to provide funds to her boyfriend and had nowhere to live. While I was away, they moved into the apartment, likely a consequence of selling her house. Unable to return to their previous home, Jim and his mother wanted to continue living in the luxury apartment, but they were struggling to pay the rent. As Jim was disheartened, I presented him with divorce papers. "Though it's a tough situation, I want a divorce. I cannot stay with someone who tries to drive me out." Seeing Jim hesitate to sign, my father persuaded him. "I thought you were a good person, but I was wrong. Please sign the papers." Following my father, my mother also spoke to Jim. "I'm disappointed in you for not showing up at Anna's grandmother's funeral. Please accept the divorce." With these words, Jim reluctantly signed the divorce papers. Feeling lighter, I stated as the president of the real estate company, "If you can't pay the rent, you need to vacate promptly. If you do not leave after the deadline, I will have to take legal action." My father laughed at this business-like approach, and Jim just nodded and looked down. Later, my ex-husband and his mother left the apartment and moved into a deteriorated house. My mother-in-law had accumulated a significant debt to provide funds to her boyfriend, and it turned out that Jim had contributed some of that money as well. The reason I hadn't received living expenses from Jim was because he had been giving the money to his mother. Although my mother-in-law reported her boyfriend to the police, he managed to evade them initially and was not easily found. However, he eventually could not escape and was arrested when more of his crimes came to light. Unfortunately, all the money he had acquired was lost to gambling and could not be recovered. Due to this situation, my mother-in-law and my ex-husband could do nothing but accept their significant losses. Having lost their home and been evicted from the luxury apartment, they were left with a massive debt. My ex-husband repeatedly contacted me trying to mend our relationship, but I firmly rejected his attempts. "I have no intention of discussing anything with someone who insulted my parents as poor. If you persist in contacting me, I will report you to the police for stalking," I sternly warned him, and after that, his contacts completely stopped. After resolving the issues with my ex-husband, I started a new life with my parents. My mother's family home was put on the market and successfully sold. Living with my parents again is different from before, and my days are filled with a new sense of freshness. Through this challenging period, I was once again reminded of the value of my parents' unconditional support and advice. Having gone through many difficulties, I feel personal growth and an increased motivation for my work. While my parents hope I will eventually remarry, I want to focus on running my company for now, putting my personal life on hold.